100 poets, one poem each. Number 8. The poem Waga wa miyako no tatsumi, shika zo sumu yo wo Ujiyama to hito wa nari. My little hermitage lies to the southeast of the capital. This is how I live here, quietly, contentedly, and yet the world calls it the mountain of grief, or so people say. 31 syllables, the 8th poem in the anthology of 100. Poem number 7 was Abe no Nakamaro, 35 years away from Japan, a man who looked at the moon in China and thought of a mountain he would never see again, longing, distance, the home that was not reachable. Poem number 8 is the opposite, a man who chose to leave the capital, who lives in the mountains by choice, who is not longing, who is perfectly content, and who finds it gently amusing that the world thinks he must be suffering. The poet. His name was Kisen Hoshi, Kisen the monk, or Kisen the priest. Hoshi means holy person, the title given to Buddhist clergy of a certain standing. He was one of the 6 poetry immortals, the Rakusen, the 6 greatest poets of the early Heian period, selected by Tsurayuki in the preface to the Kyokin Isshu. And yet, of these 6 great poets, Kisen Hoshi is the most obscure. His birth date is unknown, his death date is unknown, his family is unknown, his rank at court, if he had one, is unknown. He is known to have lived on Uji Mountain, southeast of the capital, in the hills above the river, that the tale of Genji would later make famous. That is almost everything known about him. One mountain, one poem, a name that means something like joyful spring. Keynote Tsurayuki's criticism. He was selected as one of the 6 poetry immortals, but the man who selected him did not think highly of him. Keynote Tsurayuki wrote in the preface to the Kyokin Isshu, Kisen Hoshi of Uji Mountain. His words are faint, his beginnings and endings are unclear. It is like trying to see the autumn moon, but being blocked by the clouds of dawn. This is a strange criticism. The autumn moon blocked by dawn clouds. It is the most beautiful criticism in Japanese literary history, a criticism that sounds like a poem, a negative judgment expressed in an image. That is itself more interesting than most positive judgments. What Tsurayuki seems to be saying is that Kisen Hoshi's poetry is hard to grasp, that you can sense something beautiful, but you cannot quite reach it, that the meaning slips away the moment you think you have it. This criticism, which was meant to diminish him, became the thing that made him interesting. The poet whose meaning you cannot quite reach, the autumn moon behind the dawn clouds. The word play. This poem is famous for the density of its wordplay. 3 separate pivots in 31 syllables. The first, tatsumi, the southeast, written with the characters for 2 zodiac signs. Tatsu, the dragon, Mi, the snake, between the dragon and the snake. Southeast, but also a mild, compliant person, someone who is gentle and unassuming. The double meaning sets up what the poem is doing. The monk lives in the southeast, and he lives gently, both at once. The second, shika zo sumu. This is how I live here, but shika also means deer. The deer live here, wild enough for deer, quiet enough for deer, the monk and the deer both living in the mountain in their own quiet way. The third, Uji, the mountain name, Uji, but Uji also means grief. The sorrow mountain, the world of grief, the name of the place, contains the emotion that the world projects onto the person living there. Uji Mountain, the mountain where the grieving go. That is what the world says. What the poem actually says. The world has made its assumptions. The monk lives in the mountains outside the capital. The mountain is called Uji. Uji sounds like grief. Therefore the monk must be grieving. Therefore he must have retreated, because the world was too painful. The poem says, no, shika zo sumu. This is how I live. The emphasis is on the living, the actual condition, which is quietly, contentedly, with the deer in the mountain. This is how it is. Hito wa nari. People say, not. I say, not. This is true. People say, the world has its story about me. The world can have its story. I have my mountain. There is no anger in this poem. There is no defensiveness. There is barely even contradiction. Just the quiet placement of the actual beside the assumed. Here is how I live. People say otherwise, and here is where the poem ends, gently, with a smile that the poem does not name. Uji, Uji, the place, the mountain and the river and the town, southeast of the old capital, the place the aristocracy went when they wanted to be away from the capital without being far from it. The river runs through it, the Uji River, cold and fast and clear, famous for fishing, famous for its bridges, famous for the particular mist that rises from the water in the morning. Kisen Hoshi lived here, in the hills above the river, in a small dwelling, simple, the kind of place that a monk who has decided that simplicity is enough, makes for himself. Later this would be the landscape of the Uji chapters of the tale of Genji, the river where Ukifune walked into the water, the hills where she was found, the mountain where Kaoru stood and looked at what he could not have. But that was later. In Kaizen's time it was simply the mountain, the river, the deer, the morning mist, and the monk who lived there in his own quiet way. The poem in the Kokinshu. There is one more thing about this poem that the scholars note. In the Kokinshu, the first great imperial anthology, this poem appears not under Kisen's name, but as Yomibito Shirazu, a person whose name we do not know. This is the fourth poem in a row where the authorship is uncertain. The third poem, by Sarumaru Dayu, also appears as anonymous in the Kokinshu. The sixth poem, by Yakamochi, may not have been his. The seventh poem, by Nakamaro, may have been composed by Ki no Tsurayuki, and now the eighth poem, also listed as anonymous, also attributed elsewhere to a specific person, also uncertain, the anthology of 100 poets, is in many ways an anthology of uncertain poets. The names attached to the poems are often guesses, often traditions, often the result of someone deciding that a beautiful anonymous poem needed a name, and Kisen Hoshi, the monk on the mountain, who wrote about how people misread him, may himself be a misreading, a name attached to an anonymous poem, a person imagined into existence to give the poem a home. The mountain. There is a mountain in Uji today called Kisen Kisen's mountain, named for the monk who lived there, or who was said to have lived there. There is a cave on the mountain called Kaizen's Cave, where he is said to have lived. The mountain exists, the cave exists, the deer still come there, the morning mist still rises from the river below. Whether the monk existed in the way the tradition says he did is a question the mountain cannot answer. It just sits there, southeast of the old capital, in the place the poem describes, exactly where the poem says it is. Waga iyo wa miyako no tatsumi, shika zo sumu yo wo Ujiyama to, hito wa iu nari, my little hermitage, to the southeast. This is how I live. People say otherwise. The mountain listens. The deer come and go. The morning mist rises. And whoever lived here in their own quiet way, exactly as the poem says.